In this section, we're going to talk about Cisco IOS. Cisco IOS, originally Internet Operating System, is a family of software used on most Cisco systems, routers, and switches. Earlier switch ran CAT-OS. IOS is a package of routing, switching, internetworking, and telecommunications functions integrated into multitasking operating system. And let's take a look to the iOS features. Cisco iOS is located in Flash. It can be updated and copied to volatile RAM that provides software and hardware communication. The Cisco iOS Command Line Interface (CLI) is the primary user interface used for configuring, monitoring, and maintaining Cisco devices. CLI can be accessed using console, telnet, SSH, and aux ports. Let's start with the console port. Every Cisco router or a switch has a console port, also known as the management port, on its backside, as in here. Console port is used to connect a computer directly to a router or switch and manage the router or switch, since there is no display device for a router or switch. Normally, router console port is a RJ45 port, a special type of cable. This cable, known as rollover cable, is used to connect to the serial COM port of the computer to the router or switch console port. One end of the cable is RJ49 type and a DB9 to RJ45 converter is molded on the other end. Let's go ahead with the telnet, another access method to CLI. Telnet is a protocol that allows you to connect to remote devices over a network. Using telnet client software on your computer, you can make a connection to a remote device. In most cases, you will need to log into the remote host, which requires that you have an account on that system. By default, telnet does not encrypt any data sent over the connection, including passwords. Because of serious security concerns, it is recommended to use the SSH protocol instead of telnet. SSH, also known as Secure Shell, is a network protocol that provides administrators with a secure way to access a remote networking device. Secure Shell provides strong authentication and secure encrypted data communication between two network devices. Because of that, it is always preferred over telnet. Terminal emulation programs are used for accessing to a device using console port, telnet, or SSH. And the popular terminal emulation programs are PuTTY, Secure CRD, and the HyperTerminal. As you can see, here is the PuTTY window. And if you want to, for example, communicate to a device, you enter the host name or the IP address of the device and you choose the connection type in here, whether it's telnet, SSH, or serial or something like that. Then you click the open and communicate the device. Cisco iOS modes. iOS has 4 different mode, guys, and they are user exec, privileged exec, global configuration, and specific configuration modes. User exec mode, this mode is the first mode a user has access to after logging into the router. The user mode can be identified by the greater than prompt following the router name. This mode also allows the user to execute only basic commands such as those that show the system's status. Privileged exec mode allows users to view the system configuration, restart the system, and enter router configuration mode. Privileged mode also allows all the commands that are available in user mode. In the privileged mode, as you can see, we have a pound sign. Global configuration mode allows the users to modify the running system configuration, and this mode has various submodes starting with global configuration mode, and they are known as specific configuration modes. If you want to navigate between the different iOS modes, we have some options. For example, if you're in the user exec mode and want to navigate to the privileged exec mode, we are using the enable command. If you're in the enable mode and if you want to switch to the config mode, we are using the configure terminal command. And when you're in the global config and if you want to switch to a specific interface configuration mode, for example, you type interface and the interface's name on the config mode basically, and you get into the config interface mode. Note, exit command is used for passing to the upper mode always. So, let's take a look to the iOS features. iOS provides context-sensitive help. Please keep in mind that question mark is your best friend always. Alright, let's take a look to the screen and let's say that we are trying to type the clock set command. Instead of typing clock, if I type, for example, CLO and K, that iOS is warning us and saying us that this is an unknown command, for example. For example, if you could not remember the commands clock, but if you just remind the C and L, if you type CL and put a question mark, iOS shows you the commands that you can use in that iOS mode. For example, if you type clock, the command is right now it's okay, and if you just hit the enter, it again warns you that that is an incomplete command because we are gonna use the clock set, as you know. For example, after clock and we type the question mark and hit the enter, it's showing us that what commands more we can use after that command. For example, it's offering us the set command and giving us some clues what the command is doing rightly, and it's saying as set the time and date, for example. So let's go ahead with the context sensitive help, and for example, we type clock set and the clock, for example. Then, if we hit the question mark again, it's also saying us that we can use the day of the month or we can type month keyword. Alright, clock set and the clock, and we type something like that again, then hit the enter. It's saying as invalid input detected, which says that we entered some wrong commands. Then we are typing clock set and August and hit the enter, it's saying us that the command is still incomplete. So if you want to see the whole command, you just can use the question mark again, and it's saying us what is missing part of the command. And we have some shortcuts and hotkeys that we can use in the iOS. The tab key is one of your best friends, as well as the question mark. The tab completes the remainder of the command or the keyword. For example, you can use Ctrl R and redisplay a line. For example, you can use the up arrow key on your keyboard and scroll backward through former commands. And let's take a look at the commonly used show commands on Cisco iOS. We can use show version to display iOS version, device information, and etc. We can use show IPRP command and display IP MAC address mappings. We can use show flash command and display the files in our flash. We can use the show running config command and display the current configuration running on our device. We can also use show CDP neighbors to display directly connected Cisco neighbors to our device. We can use show VLAN to display the VLAN information, and we can use the show MAC address table and display the MAC address table. And let's take a look to the iOS configuration basics, and we are starting with the host name. The host name is the identification of your device. It starts with letter and ends with a letter or digit, and please keep in mind that you cannot use space when you are defining your host name. For example, you can use my switch, but you cannot use my switch with a space between Y and S in here. It's so hard to identify devices without hostname while making configuration, so you need to assign the proper host names to your devices. To configure a host name, you get into the configure mode by typing configure terminal command, and basically we are typing host name and our host name of the switch. So we need to limit access to our devices as well. Access to devices can be limited by using passwords, and this provides security for unauthorized access. To limit the access to privileged exec mode, for example, we can use enable password, and we can use enable secret commands. Enable secret command encrypts the password, so it's recommended to use. For example, in this example in here, we are in the config mode, we are getting into config mode, and we are using enable secret and enable password, Cisco, and enable secret class commands. As you can see in the show run output, show running config output, the enable password, which is Cisco, is not encrypted, while the enable secret password is encrypted in here. Let's take a look to limiting access to user exec mode, and VTY lines are logical connection points to a router or switch, and that they are used by Telnet as well as SSH to remotely access your router. 0 to 4 means this guy supports 5 sessions at the same time. So to limit the access to the VTY, for example, you type line VTY 0 to 4 and you type login, and you can define a password as you can see in here. If you want to encrypt all your passwords in your showrun output, we have a great command. We can use service password encryption, this command, to encrypt all passwords on the showrun output. For example, in here, even if we define an enable password instead of the enable script, because of we're using the show service password encryption command, our enable password is encrypted on the showrun output, as you can see. Banner mode D, let's talk about the banner mode D. Banner mode D is a message mostly used for giving a legal notice to prevent unauthorized access to device. For example, welcome to techmint.com. All connections are monitored and recorded. Disconnect immediately if you are not an authorized user. So let's take a look how we can save a configuration file on our Cisco router or switch. We can use copy running config to startup config command. We can use write memory command, and running configurations are copied to NVRAM and they become active even if the device is reloaded after using one of these commands. Let's take a look to the IP addressing of devices now. Network devices must be configured with an IP address and the subnet mask. IP address is occurred in dotted decimal format and numbers between 0 to 255 are used. For example, 10, 41, 25, and 7 is an example to the IP address. We cannot have an IP address like that. For example, 300, 155, and 401. This is not valid. And subnet mask format will be examined later, guys. To assign an IP address to our computer, we have two options. We can obtain an IP address automatically by using a DHCP server, or we can assign static IP addresses to our computers by using the use the following IP address option in our IPv4 property window. By using this option, we can define an IP address, subnet mask, default gateway, and we can also define the preferred DNS and alternate DNS server to our PCs. If we want to assign an IP address for routers, we are assigning to the interfaces. So, how we can assign an IP address to a router is this. We are getting into the interface mode, for example, interface fast Ethernet 00. Then we are typing the IP address command and we are typing the IP address and the subnet mask that we want to use. If we want to assign an IP address to a layer 2 switch, we need to assign the IP address under the VLAN mode. IP address is not assigned to physical ports. It's assigned to VLANs on layer 2 switch. For example, interface, VLAN, and a VLAN number. Then we can assign an IP address for this VLAN to connect to switch remotely.